This is the exact reason you can't just have kids with anyone. Y'all listen carefully to what I'm saying. You have to be careful who you have kids with. This precious baby right here, her name was baby Zara, and the man that basically was her biological father, we're not gonna even call him her dad, because did the absolute most unthinkable thing to this baby. This baby was found soaked, her diaper was soaked in blood. So we're gonna start from the beginning, y'all. Zara and her parents basically the parents had split up, okay, and they did not have any kind of court ordered custody agreement. They just decided that they were going to split custody between the two of them and verbally just communicate about when their daughter would be with each other one. Now, her father had gotten a apartment and recently just got this apartment. I want to say like weeks before. There was no heat on, there was no water on, there was nothing on in the apartment. And the reason why he ain't turning it on, because he was planning on doing something terrible to this baby girl.
Viewer discretion is advised. This is one of the most heartbreaking and disturbing cases to ever come out of Pennsylvania. This 10-month-old Zara Scruggs, a beautiful baby girl from Lower Providence Township, lost her life on October 2020 in a tragedy that shocked the entire community. What makes this story even more horrifying is that the person responsible wasn't a stranger. It was her own father. A man who should have protected her instead became the source of her greatest pain. After a lengthy investigation and emotional trial, Stevens was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, but for many that sentence could have never made it up for the loss of this innocent life. How could a parent commit a crime so unthinkable? What causes someone to cross that line between love and pure evil? Stay tuned as we share the story. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories that reveal the darkest sides of humanity. When I tell you that this trigger warning
Ooh, give those. Give those shows. Give those shows. Give your baby. Give your baby. Give your baby.
It's hard to imagine how this child's death could be any more traumatic.
I'm gonna miss her.
She didn't make a sound, no cry, no breath, no heartbeat. That's how the call began. Not from a neighbor, not from a bystander, but from her father. Calm, measured, detached. Inside a bare apartment with no heat, no lights, and no working water, a 10-month-old baby girl was found lying motionless, lying still on a mattress. There were no immediate signs of distress, no visible injuries, but something about the scene didn't add up. The water was still. The diaper was clean. The story didn't match the evidence, and while medical teams worked urgently to help her, her father, stood off to the side. Not in panic, not in tears, but silent, watching, waiting, as if the outcome was already known.
Anything else?
Her name was Zara Lynn Scruggs, and she was days away from turning 1. This wasn't a case of neglect. It wasn't a tragic accident. What unfolded next forced prosecutors, detectives, and even the community to ask the same devastating question. How could something so wrong go unnoticed for so long? Before we continue, please be advised, this case includes deeply emotional material involving a child. We share it with care, not for shock, but to raise awareness, protect the innocent, and remind every viewer why speaking up matters. To those of you who have stood with us, thank you. Your support, your shares, your voices in the comments have helped these stories reach more people than we ever imagined. You're not just viewers, you're advocates. And if you're new here, welcome. We see you. And we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments and consider subscribing if you believe in justice and the power of awareness. Every time you click, comment, or share, you're helping this story matter. Because when we stay informed, we stay vigilant. And when we speak out, we give a voice to those who no longer can. Now let's go back to the day Zara smiled for the last time. Zara Lynn Scruggs was born on December 1st, 2019. Her family called her Moo. A name that stuck, like nicknames often do, with no special reason beyond love. She was expressive, full of energy, and captivated those around her with her wide eyes and infectious smile. Her presence brought joy to everyone in the room, especially to her mother, Erica Scruggs. Erica was attentive, present, and deeply connected to her daughter. Those who knew her say she centered her life around Zara. Every milestone mattered. Every small moment, from Zara's first steps to her love for music, was carefully documented by a mother who saw nothing more important than raising her little girl. Zara's father, Austin Stevens, was also in the picture. At 29, he was seen as someone who had found stability. He coached for the Lower Providence Warriors, a youth football team. He also helped run a construction business, Black Diamond Construction. His outward appearance was one of control, structure, and normalcy. He spoke well, dressed neatly, and had the kind of professional front that didn't attract suspicion. There was nothing in his background that raised concern. No public complaints, no legal trouble, nothing that suggested he posed any risk to his own child. From the outside, he was a capable co-parent. After Erica and Austin ended their relationship, they agreed to co-parent without going through the court system. It was a mutual decision, informal, based on familiarity and a sense of mutual respect. Zara stayed with her mother full-time, but occasionally spent weekends with her father. That agreement had worked smoothly. There were no major conflicts, no emergency calls, no signs that anything was amiss. When Austin came by to pick up Zara, Erica's family didn't hesitate. Her father, Zara's grandfather, would often greet Austin with a handshake or a smile. On this particular weekend, he handed Zara over without a second thought. At that point, Austin had just moved into a new apartment in Lower Providence. He mentioned that the place was still being set up, that some utilities hadn't been turned on yet. It didn't raise alarms. People move all the time. Temporary inconveniences aren't uncommon. He explained it casually. No one pushed further. The visit wasn't unusual. There were no changes in behavior, no tension, no signals that something wasn't right. In Erica's mind, her daughter was spending time with her father. In her parents' eyes, this was just another routine handoff between co-parents who had made peace with their past. And in that silence, trust filled the space. These types of arrangements are more common than most realize. Many families rely on verbal agreements structured around shared history, goodwill, and the assumption that no parent would ever harm their child. It's often safer to believe in the best, to assume that what looks fine on the outside must be just as safe on the inside. But safety, when unexamined, can become a mask. The illusion of it can blind even the most attentive family. Because when something feels familiar, it rarely triggers alarm. That's what makes it so difficult to see. Not because the signs aren't there, but because we're not looking for them. So many families trust. But trust doesn't guarantee safety. If you've ever shared custody or cared for a child, let us know in the comments what signs would worry you. The hardest part of hindsight is realizing the quiet moments were the ones that mattered most. Moments that felt ordinary, even forgettable. And that's what makes this case so difficult. There were no sirens before it began. No warning shots, just the assumption that everything was fine until it wasn't. October 3rd, 2020. It was a Saturday evening in Lower Providence Township, Pennsylvania. Austin Stevens had recently taken up residence in a new apartment located at 3400 Germantown Pike. The apartment was modest and unfurnished. At the time, it lacked some basic utilities. No heating, no hot water, and no working electricity. According to official reports, the indoor temperature hovered around 59 degrees Fahrenheit. Despite those conditions, Austin followed through with plans to have his daughter for the weekend. That evening, he arrived at Erica's parents' home to pick up 10-month-old Zara. The handoff was routine. No one expressed concern. Austin gave no indication that anything was unusual about his apartment or the visit. He took Zara and left. It was supposed to be just another night between a father and his child. What occurred over the next few hours would later be scrutinized in forensic detail, revealing a timeline that raised more questions than answers. Between 9:27 and 10:22 p.m., Austin Stevens was active on his phone. Search logs retrieved by investigators showed a series of concerning queries, phrases that suggest a growing awareness that something wasn't right. They included, "If baby stops breathing? What if you don't hear baby heartbeat? How do you know if a baby is dead?" The search activity didn't take place in isolation. At the very same time, Stevens was also engaged in conversations on social media. Investigators later confirmed he was messaging 2 different women, engaging in casual conversation, flirting, and sending images of himself. These messages, obtained by law enforcement through warrant, showed no mention of his daughter, no signs of concern, and no request for help. During the investigation, authorities carefully noted the timing of these online interactions. They were sent within minutes of the search queries. He was alternating between looking up urgent medical terms and casually talking to women. The contrast was startling. At 10:40 p.m., Austin called emergency services. In the recorded call, he claimed that his daughter had slipped and hit her head while bathing. He told the dispatcher that he had stepped out of the bathroom momentarily and returned to find her unresponsive. Paramedics were immediately dispatched to the scene. What they found did not match his account. When first responders entered the apartment, they observed that the bathtub was dry. There was no indication that a bath had been run, let alone used recently. Zara was found wearing a diaper and placed on a mattress. The conditions inside the apartment were cold and dim. There was no warmth in the room, no signs of a child-friendly environment, and no obvious evidence that an accident had occurred the way it had been described. More striking, however, was Austin's behavior. According to the paramedics on scene, his demeanor was neutral, unusually calm, almost disconnected. When asked to assist, he made no effort to correct mistakes or clarify what had happened. He stood nearby as resuscitation efforts were underway, offering little verbal or emotional response. Medical personnel began their work, applying standard protocols to stabilize the child and prepare her for immediate transport. Despite their efforts, the situation was critical. Later, when investigators pieced together the timeline, the window between the initial signs of medical distress and the emergency call would become one of the most scrutinized aspects of the case. What was Austin doing during that hour? Why had he waited? And why was his online activity so far removed from the seriousness of the moment? These inconsistencies, both in the physical scene and in his digital behavior, formed the early pillars of the investigation. They did not yet provide a full picture. But they introduced a troubling possibility that something wasn't right long before the phone call was ever made. When something doesn't feel right, don't hesitate to speak up. Even small inconsistencies can mean everything. In cases like this, timing is everything. And the truth often is hiding in what someone didn't say soon enough. October 4th, 2020. Just after midnight. At 12:12 a.m., medical staff formally recorded the time. 10-month-old Zara Scruggs was no longer responsive to any life-saving measures, and she had unfortunately passed away. Hospital records confirmed her arrival had been under urgent conditions. Despite multiple interventions, the outcome was final. The scene was then passed on to investigators for further review. At this point, the case moved into the hands of forensic professionals. Montgomery County's Office of the Coroner assigned the matter to Dr. Frederick Hellman, a seasoned medical examiner with years of experience conducting high-profile forensic reviews. The next phase was clear: determine the official cause and manner of what had occurred. As is standard, a full examination was ordered. The results would later be submitted as part of the case file and presented in legal proceedings. According to Dr. Hellman's findings, the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. The manner was ruled a homicide. The medical findings alone were sufficient to raise concern, but they weren't the only pieces of evidence investigators had access to. Law enforcement immediately began working with forensic specialists to compile a timeline based on digital and physical data. One of the first things they did was obtain a search warrant for Austin Stevens' phone. The contents of the device would play a pivotal role in unraveling his claims. Inside the phone's data, investigators uncovered the same internet searches referenced earlier. But this time, they matched them to timestamps and messaging history. The queries for emergency procedures had taken place within an hour before the 911 call. But there was a critical gap. While these searches occurred, Stevens wasn't just browsing for help. He was actively engaged in social conversations with two women on social media platforms. The content of those chats was casual, flirtatious, unrelated to any emergency. This wasn't speculation. The timestamps provided by his own device created a sequence that could be verified second by second. While Zara's condition was declining, Stevens had not called for assistance. Instead, he was alternating between medical search terms and unrelated messages. Further examination of the physical space revealed additional inconsistencies. Among the items collected as evidence was a diaper found near the child's sleeping area. Its condition raised immediate concerns, and it was submitted for forensic analysis. Reports later confirmed it contained biological material that became part of the official case record. That detail alone challenged Stevens' earlier explanation of a fall in the bathtub. The physical evidence and the statement he had given did not align. The digital timeline was what ultimately began to close the gap. By comparing Stevens' device activity, message history, and browser logs, investigators were able to construct a nearly minute-by-minute reconstruction of events leading up to the emergency call. At no point in those exchanges was there a message for help. No call to a friend, no text to a relative, no communication that suggested a parent in panic. The only outreach made to 911 came after the hour had already passed and the search terms had already been entered. When authorities reviewed the evidence, they noted something particularly troubling. Among the messages retrieved from the phone, one stood out. A line sent during the middle of his digital activity, time-stamped and recorded. It showed that Stevens had been aware of his daughter's condition well before the 911 call was placed. And yet, during that same time frame, he had continued his unrelated messaging with no visible sense of urgency. This became the pivot point in the investigation. Everything that followed would rely on this contradiction. A child who needed help, a timeline that showed delay, and a father whose actions didn't reflect the emergency unfolding around him. But one key message on his phone revealed exactly how long he knew and chose not to act. October 6, 2020, just 2 days after the events at the apartment on Germantown Pike, Montgomery County detectives took decisive action. Following a detailed investigation of the scene, interviews with emergency responders, and a forensic review of digital evidence, Austin Stevens was formally arrested. The charges filed against him included aggravated assault, involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, and endangering the welfare of a child. The arrest came swiftly. Authorities stated there was sufficient probable cause based on conflicting statements, inconsistencies at the scene, and the digital trail recovered from his phone. Stevens was processed and held at Montgomery County Correctional Facility. Prosecutors moved to have him held without release, citing the seriousness of the charges and the nature of the investigation. By December 1st, after additional forensic results were submitted and the medical examiner's conclusions were officially entered into the case record, the charges were escalated. Montgomery County District Attorney Kevin R. Steele announced that Stevens would now face additional counts, including first-degree murder and third-degree murder, along with related criminal offenses. Assisting in the prosecution were First Assistant District Attorney Edward F. McCann and Assistant District Attorney Brianna Ringwood. Together, they prepared the case for presentation to the court. In their statement to the press, the team emphasized the strength of the evidence and the urgency of pursuing justice. Bail was set at $1 million. Stevens was denied release. The court cited risk factors and community safety in its ruling. The gravity of the charges, especially in light of the forensic timeline and phone data, left no room for doubt about the path forward. News of the arrest spread quickly. Community members who had once seen Stevens as a reliable coach and business owner now saw headlines they could barely reconcile with the person they thought they knew. Among those who responded publicly was Stephen's own mother. In a powerful statement made to local media, she voiced her complete disapproval of her son's actions. "He is a monster. We do not support him," she said. "We are completely against what he did to my granddaughter." It was a rare moment of clarity in a case filled with deception. The emotional split between personal love and moral accountability was not softened. She chose the child over her son, and she said so without hesitation. Meanwhile, the broader community began to grieve. In the days that followed, friends, family, and even strangers came together to support Zara's mother and extended family. A GoFundMe was launched in Zara's name. Within a short period, over $46,000 was raised. Contributions poured in from across the country. Many left comments expressing sympathy, outrage, and a desire for change. A funeral service was held shortly afterward. More than 500 people attended. The ceremony was filled with photographs, soft music, and shared memories. The outpouring of support was a reflection of how deeply this case had touched the public. People who had never met Zara felt the weight of what was lost. This wasn't just a legal case. It became a wake-up call, a reminder that harm doesn't always come from where it's expected. Sometimes it comes quietly, from someone once welcomed at the door. If your community has ever rallied in response to a crisis, if you've seen neighbors become protectors, share how below. Because when justice begins, it doesn't start in a courtroom. It starts with people paying attention and refusing to look away. October 13th, 2020. Less than 2 weeks after his arrest, Austin Stevens appeared in court for his preliminary hearing. Prosecutors presented the foundational elements of the case: digital records, forensic summaries, and key witness statements. The goal wasn't to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Not yet. It was to demonstrate that the case had sufficient weight to proceed to trial. The presiding judge reviewed the material and agreed. The evidence was compelling. Testimony from investigators pointed to contradictions between Stevens' statements and the physical findings. Search data retrieved from his phone and the timeline surrounding the emergency call were introduced to the court as key pieces of the prosecution's position. The case was bound over for trial. The court then began its slow progression toward a full jury trial. COVID-19 had introduced delays across the entire justice system. Like many other proceedings during that time, this case was impacted. Courtrooms operated at reduced capacity. Hearings were staggered.
He was attracted to his 10-month-old daughter, but no one knew until it was too late. And trigger warning, the details of this case are very hard to hear. Zara was born December 1st of 2019 to her mother Erica and her father Austin, and their relationship didn't last long, but they decided to remain friends for their daughter's sake. By the time Zara was 10 months old, her parents had a joint custody agreement that was strictly verbal and not mandated by the court. On October 3rd of 2020, Austin picked up Zara from her grandparents' house and brought her back to his apartment. Now, he just moved into that apartment 2 days ago, so he didn't have power, hot water, or heat, but he didn't care because he was planning to do something so sick that it would shock the entire community. Around 10:40 that night, Austin made a call to 911 saying he found Zara unresponsive. When first responders got there, they found Zara lying on the bed with no clothes on. She was not breathing. She was gray and cold to the touch. Zara's father was standing at the foot of the bed acting strange, completely calm and emotionless. Zara was then transported to a medical center where she was pronounced dead just 2 hours later. When doctors told Austin his daughter just passed, he shrugged his shoulders and sighed like he didn't care. When doctors removed her diaper, they found it overflowing with blood, and that's when they realized that she was viciously essayed in her A and V to the point where she was literally torn apart. This left her with a gaping hole that was nearly infected. He had almost disemboweled her. When police confronted Austin, he denied everything and said she had fallen, and that's where she got her injuries from. They also found out he waited over an hour to call 911. While she was laying unresponsive, he was sending explicit messages to 2 or 3 different women and Googling things like, "How do you know if a baby is still breathing?" Austin was later convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, but rest in peace to his poor daughter, and as always, I'll keep you guys updated.
Father was attracted to his 10-month-old daughter, but no one knew that his love was in trouble until it was too late. Trigger warning. On the evening of October 3rd at 11 p.m., 29-year-old Austin Stevens reported to the police that his 10-month-old daughter, Zara Scruggs, was unresponsive. When emergency personnel arrived at the scene, they found that the baby felt very cold to the touch. The emergency personnel immediately immediately took Zara to the hospital. When the doctor untied the diaper, a large amount of blood flowed out, and Zara was ultimately unable to be saved. 2 hours later, the doctor announced her death. Austin told the police that he was bathing Zara and had only been away for less than a minute when he heard a heavy blow. He believed Zara had fallen on his own, and investigators knew he was lying. They obtained a search warrant for the contents of his phone, which lasted for 2 hours after Zara did not respond. He searched and chatted online on his phone, including, "If I stop breathing, how to do CPR, and my child is not breathing." During this period, he also chatted with multiple women, and finally chose to call 911. This monsters A and CA his 10-month-old daughter, and then intentionally caused her to lose her life to cover up everything he did to her. Austin was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Poor Zara. Her short life ended tragically because she met such a father.